My 17-year-old daughter was banned from my sister's wedding for being too young. I didn't argue, I simply said we wouldn't attend. But when Christmas came, I made a quiet decision that no one expected. Suddenly, I became the villain in every family group chat. My name is Julia. I'm a mother, a sister, and for the first time, the woman who finally said, enough. This isn't just about a wedding. It's about what happens when silence becomes survival, and when a mother chooses her daughter over the family that never truly chose her. Julia had always believed in the power of quiet mornings, the kind that started with soft light through the blinds and the smell of pancakes. Lena liked a little too crispy on the edges. Their home was modest but warm, filled with mismatched picture frames, and paint-splattered aprons hanging in the kitchen. Lena, her daughter of 14 years, had just turned 17 and was blossoming into an artist with a soul older than her years. Her eyes still held that quiet depth Julia remembered from the adoption centre, a gaze that seemed to weigh the world even back then. Life had finally reached a steady rhythm. School, art, shared dinners, gentle laughter. Then the wedding announcement arrived. Emily, Julia's younger sister, had gotten engaged to her long-time boyfriend, Drew. The news wasn't shocking. Emily had always been the golden child, the one with the curated Instagram feed and the ability to make chaos look graceful. The engagement came with a filtered photo of the ring and a caption that read, "He put a ring on it, can't wait to celebrate with everyone I love." Julia had clicked like without thinking too much. Lena, however, had been genuinely excited. She spent the next few days sketching a card. Carefully hand-drawn wedding bells, doves and tiny hearts, all delicately coloured in pastels. She used too much glitter as usual and glued a little lace along the edge. Julia watched her work in silence, feeling something warm and aching grow inside her. Lena was never pushy, never loud. But when she gave something, she gave all of herself. When the card was done, they mailed it with a handwritten note. A week passed, then 2. Then Julia found the card in the back seat of Emily's car, partially crushed beneath a Starbucks cup. When she borrowed it during a family gathering, she didn't say anything. Lena didn't ask. Instead, she moved on to planning her outfit. She found a soft blue dress online and saved it in 4 different tabs, trying to decide whether to wear her hair up or in loose curls. "Do you think I should bring a small clutch or just my phone?" she asked one evening. Julia smiled and said, "Whatever makes you feel comfortable." Lena smiled back, nerves shimmering in her eyes. Then, one Thursday afternoon, the wedding invitation arrived. It came in a sleek envelope, heavy cardstock, gold embossing, the kind of design that screams elegance and careful curation. Julia opened it while standing at the kitchen counter. Lena was nearby, bent over her sketchbook, humming softly. The invitation had all the standard details, the venue, the attire, the time. And then in a smaller italic font at the bottom, adults only. 18 plus, strictly enforced, no exceptions. Julia read it once, then again. Her breath caught in her chest. She turned the card over, hoping there was some handwritten note, some kind of acknowledgement. There wasn't. Lena must have noticed the shift. She looked up slowly, pen frozen mid-line. "Is everything okay?" Julia hesitated. It's an adult-only wedding." Lena blinked. "Oh, so I can't go?" There was a long pause. Lena stared down at her sketch pad. Then, barely above a whisper, she asked, "Is it because I'm adopted?" Julia felt the question slice through her like a blade. She tried to steady her breath, to find the right words, but nothing came. Because it wasn't just about age. It never had been. The wedding was merely another chapter in a long book of quiet exclusions, of polite rejections and unspoken judgments. "No," Julia finally said. "No, sweetheart, that's not it at all." Lena didn't nod, didn't push. She just turned back to her page and started colouring again, using darker tones now. Julia wanted to scream, to call Emily, to demand an explanation, but instead she stood still, hand resting on the invitation, heart aching with a truth she'd refused to name for far too long. Later that evening, after Lena had gone to bed and the house had settled into its usual hush, Julia sat at the kitchen table with the invitation in her hands. Her fingers traced the edges of the gold-foiled paper, almost like she could rub the words away if she pressed hard enough. Strictly enforced, she whispered aloud, the phrase bitter on her tongue. Something in her tightened. Not anger. Not yet. Just a slow, sinking dread. She picked up her phone, stared at Emily's name in the message thread for a long moment, and finally typed, "Hey, just wanted to double-check the invitation. It says 18 plus. Is that a hard rule?" She hit send. A few minutes passed. Then Emily replied, "Yeah, it's a blanket rule. Keeps things simple. Hope you understand." Julia stared at the screen. So Lena wouldn't be allowed? This time the reply came slower. "Look, it's not personal. We just want an adult atmosphere. Less stress." Not personal. Julia's hand clenched around the phone. Of course, it wasn't personal, not to Emily. Not to the family who had spent years treating Lena like a footnote, like an obligation Julia had chosen but no one else had signed up for. She typed, then erased, then typed again. "I just thought, since she's your niece..." The typing dots flickered for a while, then stopped, then flickered again. "It's the same rule for everyone. Hope that's okay." Hope that's okay. Julia let the phone fall to the table with a soft clatter. She could feel the burn behind her eyes, the way grief always sneaks up as something tight in the throat. The truth wasn't new, but it had never been spelled out so clearly, printed in italics at the bottom of a wedding invite and confirmed in cold, impersonal texts. She looked towards the hallway, where Lena's bedroom light still glowed faintly beneath the door. The girl who had carefully made that card, who had already started choosing shoes and sketching hairstyles. The girl who had asked, "Is it because I'm adopted?" and received silence as an answer. Julia rose, walked to her laptop and opened the RSVP link. The interface was polished, full of floral motifs and smiling photos of Emily and Drew. There was a menu drop-down, chicken or vegetarian, a spot to indicate dietary restrictions, and then at the bottom a simple yes or no. She hovered over it for a long time. Then, without ceremony, clicked, "Not attending." She didn't write a note, didn't send a text, didn't call to explain, just no. The next morning, Emily's text arrived just after 10 a.m. "Hey, saw your RSVP, is everything okay?" Followed a few minutes later by, "If this is about the age thing, I hope you understand. We're being super consistent with everyone. Nothing personal, right?" Julia didn't reply. Not because she didn't have a response, but because nothing she could say would land in a place where Emily would actually listen. It wasn't about consistency. It never had been. It was about Lena not being seen. Not really. Not as family. Not as permanent. Not as worthy. When Julia had adopted her at 3 years old, she'd made a promise. Spoken only to herself at first. Lena will never feel like an outsider again. She will always know she belongs. And now, here they were, nearly 14 years later, and Lena was still asking if she was enough. Later that week, Sophie messaged too. "Heard you're not coming to the wedding, what's going on?" Julia ignored it. Then came the call from their mother, a rare occurrence unless there was something to criticise. Julia let it go to voicemail, but the message that followed was a tired sigh pressed into words. "Claire, I heard you're not going. Is this really about the age limit? Lena's almost 18. It's not like she's a little kid. She's family. Don't punish your sister over one night." Julia replayed that line. She's family. No, that had never truly been the case, not for them. Julia opened the family group chat and stared at the rows of messages. Memes, recipes, plans for the rehearsal dinner, talk of matching dresses. Not once had Lena's name appeared. Not once had anyone asked what she might wear, or if she was excited. The silence had spoken louder than any rejection. Julia stood from her chair, walked to Lena's room and gently opened the door. Lena was at her desk, headphones in, sketching. Her face was calm, almost serene. When she noticed her mom, she pulled one earbud out. Julia crossed the room and knelt beside her. "We're not going to the wedding," she said simply. Lena blinked. "Okay." She didn't ask why, she didn't argue, she just nodded and reached for Julia's hand. That small gesture held everything, resignation, pain, and understanding far too old for 17. Julia squeezed her fingers. "It's not because of you." "I know," Lena said. But there was no joy in her voice, only quiet certainty. She'd seen this coming before her mother had. And just like that, Julia understood. This wasn't the first time Lena had felt excluded. It was just the first time Julia couldn't pretend it was something else. Long before the wedding invitation arrived, long before Lena asked that unbearable question, there were signs, small ones, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But Julia had always paid attention, or at least she thought she had. The first moment that came back to her was from a Christmas Eve 5 years earlier. Lena was 12, still holding on to the magic of the holidays, even though that magic had never quite looked the same in their family. That year, Julia had gone all out, decorated the tree with Lena's handmade ornaments, baked cookies using Lena's favourite cinnamon recipe, and even convinced Lena to wear a velvet dress for dinner. They arrived at Julia's parents' house with a car full of carefully wrapped gifts and too much hope. As the kids gathered around the living room for presents, Julia noticed the personalised gift baskets lined up neatly, each labelled with a cousin's name in sparkling calligraphy. Lucas, Ella, Ava, Ben. But none said Lena. There was one extra basket sitting off to the side, no name tag, no glitter. Just a generic Happy Holidays sticker slapped on the front. Julia felt her stomach drop. She turned to her mother, who was laughing with Sophie in the kitchen. "Mum, did you forget Lena's—" Her mother waved her off. "She has one right there, but it's not personalised. She's lucky to have one at all. It was a rush this year." Julia didn't push. She didn't want to make a scene. Instead, she smiled tightly and brought the plain basket to Lena, who accepted it with that same soft expression. Half smile, half surrender. Later that night, as they drove home, Julia asked, "Did you like your gifts?" Lena nodded. "Yeah, the lotion smells nice." "Next year we'll make our own baskets," Julia offered. "One's way better than those." Lena didn't say anything. She just looked out the window and whispered, "It's okay, Mum. I'm used to it." That line had stayed with Julia for years. Then there was the Easter brunch when Lena was 10. She'd spent hours the night before painting little eggs with watercolour flowers and carefully drawing bunny faces on each. Julia had helped her pack them into a basket to give to Grandma. When they arrived, Lena presented it proudly. Her mother smiled, took it and set it next to the centrepiece, then never mentioned it again. Later that day, one of the cousins drew a silly stick figure family on a paper placemat, and Julia's mum taped it to the fridge like it was a masterpiece. Lena looked at it for a long time. She didn't say a word. Julia told herself it was unintentional, that her mother didn't mean to overlook Lena, that the cousins just got more attention because they were louder or more outgoing. But deep down she knew better, because even in family photos Lena was always somehow in the back, or on the edge, or cropped out entirely when images were shared online. Once at a 4th of July barbecue, a family friend had asked Julia, "And who's this sweet girl?" Before Julia could answer, her father jumped in. "That's Claire's girl. She's with her for now." With her for now. As if Lena were a house guest, a phase, a project Julia was working on until she had a real child. Julia remembered it confronting him later. "She's my daughter." He shrugged. Of course, no one's saying otherwise. But they were, constantly. In the way they spoke, in the things they didn't say, in the absence of her name, in every shared memory. Julia had tried, time and again, to soften the blow, to smooth things over. "They don't mean it like that," she'd tell Lena. "They're just old-fashioned." "They don't think," she'd say, "not about how it sounds." But Lena always knew. Even as a little girl, she noticed. "They don't say my name," she once said quietly at age 9. Julia had replied, "What do you mean?" "They say your daughter, not Lena. Just like she's someone far away." Julia's heart had cracked then. And now, as she sat with the memory of that broken invitation and her daughter's haunted question, "Is it because I'm adopted?" she realised how many times she'd let silence fill the space where defence should have been. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Julia stopped by her parents' house to drop off a few containers of soup. Her mother had been recovering from a mild flu, and Julia, despite the ever-growing wedge between them, still believed in showing up when it mattered. She rang the bell, half hoping no one would answer, but the door opened almost immediately. Her mother greeted her with a tired smile and ushered her inside. They made small talk in the kitchen as Julia placed the soup in the fridge. That's when she saw it, an envelope on the counter half open with glossy photo prints poking out. Curious, she pulled one halfway out. It was a collage of family pictures, labelled Grandma's Little Crew. 4 square portraits arranged neatly on a white background. Lucas, Ella, Ava, Ben. Each smiling, posed, perfectly lit. No Lena. Julia froze. Her heartbeat ticked louder in her ears. "Mum, what's this?" she asked, holding the photo up. "Oh, that," her mother said casually. "Just some pictures I sent to Marlene and Patricia. You know, for the Christmas cards." There's no photo of Lena. Her mother blinked, then turned back to wiping the counter. It was just for the blood grandkids, nothing personal. Julia felt like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. "Nothing personal?" she repeated, voice low and sharp. Her mother glanced over, frowning. "Oh, don't start. You know what I mean." "No, I don't," Julia snapped. "Explain it to me. Why is my daughter, your granddaughter, not included?" Her mother straightened. "Julia, don't make this into a scene. It's just tradition, that's all. Blood family photos. It's not meant to exclude anyone." "But it does exclude her," Julia hissed. "You don't get to pretend you love her while deliberately erasing her from everything that matters." "I'm not erasing her. You're being dramatic." Julia stared at her, feeling heat rise in her chest, something tight and burning and decades overdue. She saw the basket. She noticed the fridge. "She knows you don't say her name." Her mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. Julia stepped back, scanning the living room behind her. The familiar mantel, the polished wood sideboard, lined with photo frames. Smiling children, birthdays, vacations, milestones. And then, nestled in the back row, a frame Julia recognised. It was the family portrait they had taken the summer Lena turned 13. Julia had submitted it herself for a slideshow at the annual reunion. She remembered the day vividly. Lena in a soft yellow dress, standing between Julia and Daniel, smiling shyly but earnestly. The frame now sat behind a ceramic vase, partially hidden, and when Julia picked it up she saw something worse. The photo inside had been swapped. In its place was a different image, Julia with her sisters, much younger, no children. No Lena. Her breath caught. The frame shook in her hands. "Where's the picture that was here?" she asked, voice trembling. Her mother turned away, busying herself with the kettle. "I needed something that matched the others." That was it. Julia didn't speak. She simply reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. Inside was a small print of the photo, Lena, smiling, hand in hers, the one Julia always carried. She pulled the back off the frame, removed the current photo, and slid Lena's picture inside. Then calmly, she walked into the hallway where the rest of the family portraits hung and placed the frame right in the centre, knocking another slightly to the side to make room. Her mother turned, watching with tight lips. "You don't get to hide her," Julia said quietly. "Not anymore." "Julia, she belongs here. She always did. And if you can't see that, then maybe you're the one who doesn't." She didn't wait for a reply. She walked out the front door without saying goodbye. That night, Julia sat in the living room with Lena, who was working on a new watercolour series. She didn't tell her about the photo swap, didn't share the words exchanged, but something in Julia's chest had shifted, like a dam finally cracking open. Lena looked up and asked, "You okay?" Julia smiled softly. "Yeah," she said. "I finally said something I should have said a long time ago." Julia had hosted Christmas for the last 8 years. It had become an unspoken rule. Her house, her cooking, her table stretched with extra leaves and folding chairs pulled from the garage. Every December, the same routine. Send out a message, make a spreadsheet, assign dishes, decorate with cheerful efficiency. Her home became the gathering point, the neutral zone, the place where grudges were silenced under garlands and wine, and every year she told herself it was worth it. Even when Lena got overlooked, when Sophie's kids were praised for every basic piano recital while Lena's art show went unnoticed, Julia clung to the idea that the tradition mattered more, that hosting meant belonging. But this year, after the wedding fallout and the photo frame incident, Julia didn't feel the urge to make room. She sat at the dining table one early December morning, sipping tea, watching frost edge the windows, and asked herself quietly, what if I just didn't? The question felt like a small rebellion, whispered into the silence. Daniel walked into the kitchen, stretching. Want me to grab the folding chairs from the garage this weekend? Julia paused, then looked up. No extra seats this year. He didn't press, just nodded. And that was that. She didn't send a message. She didn't create a spreadsheet. She didn't light the cinnamon candles or fluff the throw pillows or test her cranberry sauce recipe. She simply didn't. By December 10th, the group chat started buzzing. Sophie. Hey, what time should we plan to arrive on the 24th? Emily. Do we need to bring our own bedding this year? Mum. Julia, I'm assuming same setup as usual. Let me know how many pies to bake. Julia read each message but didn't respond. Let them sit. Let the silence grow. By December 12th, the shift came. Sophie. Are you not hosting this year? Emily. We need to make plans, Julia. It's already mid-December. Dad. If you're mad about the wedding, this isn't the way to handle it. Julia still didn't reply. Instead, she closed the chat, muted the notifications, and turned her attention to the present. Her home, her daughter, the heir finally free from forced obligations. Lena noticed, of course. She was 17, not naive. One evening, she walked into the living room holding her tablet, cheeks flushed from sketching. They're really mad, she said simply. Julia looked up. Yeah. Lena sat beside her. It's because we're not hosting. Julia nodded. They're used to certain things, and when they don't get them, they think it's personal. Lena was quiet for a moment. Is it personal? Julia exhaled slowly. Not in the way they think. I'm just tired of pretending everything's okay. Lena didn't press. She returned to her drawing, pulling her legs up beneath her on the couch, head bent in concentration. But Julia watched her from the corner of her eye, the way her fingers moved quickly, then paused, then moved again, the way her shoulders remained tense despite her calm expression. She was trying to be fine, trying not to flinch under the spotlight, even if it came in the form of texts and passive-aggressive silence. Later that night, Julia peeked into Lena's room. The girl was asleep, pencil still in hand, sketchpad crumpled slightly beneath her cheek. Julia walked over gently and lifted the pad. On the page was a watercolour of their house, snowy, quiet, with no cars in the driveway. The windows glowed gold. In front, 2 small figures stood holding mugs. No crowd, no chaos, just peace. Julia smiled. For once, peace felt like enough. It was the night of December 15th, when Julia first sensed something was wrong. She had just finished folding laundry when she passed by Lena's room and noticed the door slightly ajar. Lena was sitting on her bed, hunched over her phone, her body language tight, shoulders drawn in, lips pressed into a line. She didn't notice Julia watching, not at first. When Julia softly knocked, Lena jumped a little and quickly turned off the screen. "Hey," Julia said gently, "everything okay?" "Yeah," Lena replied too quickly, "just tired." Julia nodded but didn't press. Not yet. Later, after Lena had gone to sleep, Julia came downstairs to lock up. Her daughter's phone had been left on the coffee table, a rare occurrence, and there it was, still lit up, still open. A message from Sophie. "You're tearing our family apart." Just 6 words, but they landed like a gut punch. Julia stared at the screen. The rest of the message trailed in below. "I don't blame you for being angry, but this constant drama, it's toxic. We all tried to include Lena, but you made it impossible. It's like you want us to fail so you can play the victim." Julia couldn't breathe. She knew Sophie could be cold, dismissive, but this was targeted cruelty aimed at a child who had done nothing but exist. Her hand trembled as she set the phone down. Her mind raced. She messaged Lena directly, not Julia. Not Daniel. She had gone to a teenager, a vulnerable 17-year-old girl, to accuse her of ruining the family. The next morning, Julia made pancakes. She didn't mention the message, just observed Lena quietly as they ate, her eyes slightly puffy, her smile a little too practiced, I say. After breakfast, Julia picked up her phone, opened the family group chat and began to scroll. So many messages over the years, so many threads, recipes, photos, jokes, and beneath it all, an ever-present undercurrent of dismissal, judgment, exclusion. She scrolled to the top, paused, and hit delete group chat. A warning popped up. Are you sure you want to leave and delete this group? Yes. Then she opened her contacts. Emily, block. Sophie, block. Mom, Dad, Aunt Joyce, Uncle Pete, block, 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 every name tied to a wound, a dismissal, a backhanded comment. It all went dark. By the time Lena came back into the kitchen, Julia had closed her phone and placed it face down on the table. Lena hesitated. Is something wrong? Julia looked at her with a steady gaze. I saw the message. Lena blinked, her composure cracking. I didn't want to make it worse. Julia stood and walked to her, placing both hands on her shoulders. You didn't make anything worse. Don't you ever think that. But no. Julia's voice was firm now. You're 17, you're a child. And they came after you instead of me, because they thought you'd stay quiet, because that's what they're used to, but not anymore. Lena's lips trembled. I'm sorry. You don't apologise for being loved, Julia whispered. Then she pulled her daughter into a hug, tight, unflinching, full of everything unsaid. Later that night, Julia sat in the living room with a cup of tea, the house bathed in soft lights. No phone buzzing, no guilt-laced voicemails. No lists, no pressure, just silence. It was peaceful, but it wasn't empty. It was a reclaiming. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. The sky, dim and overcast like it too, was holding its breath. Julia had just returned from the grocery store, the cold biting through her coat, bags heavy in her arms. She was halfway through unloading them when the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. Setting the milk down, she walked to the door, heart ticking a little faster than usual. When she opened it, her parents stood there, her mother clutching a plastic container of oatmeal cookies, her father with both hands stuffed into his coat pockets. Hi, honey, her mother said with a breathy little smile. We thought we'd stop by. Julia's stomach turned. Why? Her mother held up the container like an offering. Brought your favourite. The ones with the cinnamon and walnuts, still warm. Julia didn't move. Her father cleared his throat. We just wanted to talk, clear the air. Things have been tense. That's one word for it, Julia replied, not unkindly, but without warmth. Can we come in? Her mother asked, already stepping forward slightly. No, Julia said firmly, blocking the doorway. You can say whatever you came to say from right there. A pause. Then, with a tight smile still plastered on, her mother began, Look, this whole situation with the wedding, the holidays, it got out of hand. Emotions ran high, but we're still family. We've all made mistakes. You've always been the emotional one, Julia. You feel things too deeply. That's not bad, but sometimes it clouds your judgment. Julia bit her tongue, the sting of old accusations echoing. She waited. We miss you, her mother continued, and we miss Lena. She's such a sweet girl. But this distance isn't healthy. You can't shut people out forever. Julia crossed her arms. You didn't come to apologise. You came to reset the narrative. That's not fair, her father began. No, she cut him off. What's not fair is messaging my daughter and blaming her for tearing the family apart. What's not fair is excluding her, erasing her from pictures, refusing to say her name, and then showing up with cookies like that we'll fix it. Her mother's jaw clenched, but she tried to hold the smile. We didn't mean to hurt her. You did. She's not blood, Julia. That's just a fact. And there it was. The air snapped cold. Julia stood frozen for a moment, the words slicing through her like shards of glass. Not blood. Her mother said it like she was stating the weather, like it was nothing, like it excused everything. She's not blood, Julia repeated quietly, as if testing the phrase on her own tongue. Then louder. She's not blood, so that makes it okay to treat her like she's disposable. We never said... But you meant it, Julia snapped. Every time you left her name off a card, every time you took a photo and cropped her out, every time you pretended she was just passing through my life. She's going to leave you one day, her mother said, softer now. She'll go to college, she'll grow up, you'll be alone. Julia took a slow breath. That's not a threat, that's just life. But right now she's mine. She's my daughter, and if you can't love her the way you claim to love me, then you don't get either of us." Her mother's smile faltered. "We've always been here, always tried. You're being unreasonable." "I'm being protective," Julia said. "Finally." Her father tried again. "Julia, we've forgiven worse. You're being rash." "No, I'm drawing a line." She looked down at the cookies. They looked perfect, golden edges, slightly cracked tops, the kind her mother used to pack in her lunchbox. They smelled like childhood, like false comfort. "I don't want them," Julia said. "And I don't want this performance." She took a step back, not to invite them in, but to create space, and pointed to the sidewalk. "You need to leave." Her mother blinked, stunned. "Excuse me?" "You don't get to insult my daughter and still expect an open door. Not anymore." For a second, no one moved. Then her mother's face tightened. "You're going to regret this," she said, "when she leaves you, when you're alone." Julia didn't reply. She didn't have to. She stepped forward, slowly but deliberately, and closed the door. She locked it, then leaned against the wood, listening to their muffled footsteps retreat down the steps, across the walkway and into the cold. And when the silence returned, it wasn't empty, it was earned. The silence after her parents left lingered like smoke. Julia moved through the rest of the day in a daze, folding laundry she didn't remember washing, wiping down a spotless counter, forgetting her tea until it turned cold. That night, once Lena had gone to bed, she checked her email and saw it. Subject line, "Still your mother." It was from her mom. She hesitated before opening it, but curiosity won. Inside it read, "Julia, I'm writing because I know you won't pick up the phone. I'm trying to understand your choices, but I'm worried. You've cut everyone out. You've always been so independent, but this is different. You're isolating yourself for a girl who's going to leave soon. College will come, and then what? You'll be alone. We're your real family. You'll regret pushing us away." The words blurred slightly as Julia stared at the screen. Alone. Real family. Leave. That night she didn't sleep. The next morning she woke early and made coffee, the house still quiet. She passed Lena's room and noticed the door cracked open. Lena was already up, hunched over her laptop. Julia smiled faintly and knocked. "You're up early." Lena quickly minimised her screen. "Couldn't sleep." "What were you working on?" Lena hesitated, then shrugged. "Just some art stuff, nothing big." Julia tilted her head. "Mind if I take a look?" Lena's eyes flickered. "It's not done." Julia nodded and didn't push. "Okay." But after Lena left for school, something gnawed at her. That flicker in her daughter's eyes, it wasn't defiance, it was fear, hesitation, maybe even guilt. Julia walked back to Lena's room, sat at the desk and opened the laptop. It was unlocked. She clicked the browser history. Her breath caught. Top 50 colleges with full scholarships for art majors. How to apply for financial aid without parental support. Art programs with dorms in other states. Julia scrolled further and found draft emails to admissions counsellors. They were professional, polished, and all had one thing in common. Lena was looking far, far away. She sat back in the chair, numb. Then she noticed a file folder on the desktop labelled "History for later." Inside were scanned copies of her own tax documents, Lena's artwork, a draft personal statement, and a note that read, "She's done enough. Don't make her pay for me too." Julia couldn't hold it in. She covered her mouth with her hands, tears spilling before she could stop them. The sound that escaped her wasn't elegant. It was raw, jagged, unfiltered grief. Lena thought she was a burden, that everything Julia had done, every fight, every severed tie, was too much. She cried until her chest ached, until her body slumped forward over the desk. All the silence, the endurance, the pretending. It all broke open in that moment. Later that night, after dinner, Julia knocked on Lena's door. Lena looked up from her bed, sketchbook in hand. "Hey!" "Ma!" Julia sat beside her, hands folded in her lap. She took a breath. "I saw what you were working on." Lena's eyes widened. "I wasn't hiding it. I mean, okay, maybe a little. I just—" "You think you're a burden?" Julia interrupted softly. Lena stared at her hands. Julia reached out and took one. "Sweetheart." You'll never be a burden. Never. Lena's throat bobbed. I didn't want to be the reason you lost them. You didn't make me lose them, Julia said. They were never really mine if they couldn't love you. Lena blinked fast. But I saw how much it hurt. It would hurt more, Julia said, voice steady, to let them keep hurting you. I can live with fewer chairs at Christmas. I can't live with you thinking you don't deserve to take up space in my life. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lena whispered, I wasn't trying to leave. I just wanted options. I didn't want to be the reason you stayed small. Julia laughed quietly through her tears. You never made me small. You made me braver than I ever thought I could be. Lena leaned into her, and Julia wrapped her arms around her tightly, holding on like she was anchoring herself to the only truth that mattered. They sat like that for a long time. No words, just breath and warmth and the quiet strength of knowing this was family. The kind you choose. It started with an email. Not to Julia directly, of course. That would have taken nerve. Instead, it was sent to a long BCC list. Extended family, second cousins, old church acquaintances. The subject line read, For those confused about recent events. It was from Rachel. Julia only found out because her cousin Sarah forwarded it, attached with a single line. I thought you should see this. She opened it with a sinking stomach. The tone was passive-aggressive from the start, framed as concern, cloaked in the language of family and healing. We've all been walking on eggshells for a long time, Rachel wrote. Julia has chosen to distance herself from the family, and while that's her right, many of us have been left hurt and confused. Some of you have asked why she skipped Emily's wedding, why she didn't host Christmas, why she blocked everyone. I wish I could tell you. But it seems the person driving a wedge between Julia and the rest of us is Lena. Julia froze. Lena has always been difficult, Rachel continued. Polite, yes, but distant, withdrawn. It was hard to connect with her. And Julia, well, she became so protective it was almost unhealthy. Every slight became a war. Every boundary we set became a betrayal. We were never allowed to be human around them. Julia skimmed the rest in disbelief. There was no direct accusation, just carefully placed insinuations. Enough to make people wonder, enough to twist kindness into obsession, enough to make Julia look unstable and Lena manipulative. She sat with the email for a long time. Then came the messages. Aunt Marlene texted, Just read what Rachel sent. Are you okay? Is Lena struggling with boundaries? Uncle Don called Daniel, leaving a voicemail. We're worried about Julia. Has she been overwhelmed? Maybe she needs help. The worst came from Chloe, a second cousin Lena barely knew, who left a comment under one of Lena's recent art posts on Instagram, a watercolour portrait of Julia and Lena standing in front of a house filled with light. The comment read, You're just a guest in their life. Don't forget who gave you a home. It was venom wrapped in civility. Lena didn't say anything when she saw it. She just quietly archived the post. But Julia saw her that night, curled into herself on the couch, sketchpad untouched for hours. Her daughter, who had come so far, who had just started believing she was safe, being pulled back into doubt by people who should have protected her. Julia stood behind her for a long moment before speaking. I saw the email, she said softly. Lena didn't look up. It's fine. No, it's not. She's always hated me, Lena murmured. She doesn't even know you, Julia said. And that's what makes this so cruel. She built a story out of her own ignorance, and now people are believing it. Lena finally looked up. What if they always believed it? What if this is just the first time they said it out loud? Julia sat beside her. Then we stop pretending they get to define us. Lena blinked. How? Julia didn't answer yet. She simply reached for her phone, opened the email again and read it one last time. The anger didn't spike like before. It was quieter now, colder, more precise. They told a version of the story that suited them, she said. So now I'm going to tell the truth. Julia spent the next 2 days gathering everything. Screenshots, emails, text messages, photos from holidays where Lena had been present, yet cropped out of the official albums. The birthday parties missed. The comments never acknowledged. The gifts labelled to Julia's daughter, while every cousin had their name in glitter. She wasn't angry anymore. Anger had a heat to it. What she felt now was steel, cold, focused cutting. She opened a blank email. No pleasantries, no dramatic opening. Subject, for those who want the full story. She wrote, "Some of you received an email from Rachel recently. I'm not going to debate her version of events. I'm going to show you mine. Below are a few things that have happened over the last 14 years since I adopted Lena at age 3. She was the only child without a name-labelled Easter basket. She was introduced to family friends as Claire's girl instead of our daughter. When she drew a picture for our mother, it was placed in a drawer. When the cousins drew stick figures, they were pinned to the fridge. She was excluded from family photos shared online. She was left out of Emily's wedding despite being 17 and the only niece. She received a message blaming her for tearing the family apart. I don't need you to agree with my choices. I just need you to know they weren't made in a vacuum. This wasn't over one invitation or one holiday. This has been years of silence, dismissal and subtle cruelty aimed at a child who did nothing but try to belong. I'm not asking for reconciliation. I'm not asking for sides. I'm giving you clarity. If you still choose to believe Rachel's narrative, that's your right. But at least now you have both pages of the story. I chose Lena, and I will keep choosing her." She attached a folder of labelled screenshots, hit send, and then closed her laptop. The quiet afterward was deafening. Lena stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching her mother with careful eyes. "You sent it?" Julia nodded. "Do you think it'll change anything?" "No," Julia said, "but now they don't get to lie without consequence." That night the phone rang. It was a number Julia didn't recognise. She almost ignored it, then answered. "Hello?" There was a shaky breath on the other end, then a voice she hadn't heard in years. "Julia, it's Erin from Dad's side. Sorry, I shouldn't be calling so late." Erin had always been quiet at gatherings, the kind of cousin who lingered at the edge of rooms, never quite blending into the noise. "I got your email," she continued, voice breaking. "I read every word, and I needed to tell you. I saw it too, all of it. When we were kids, I thought maybe I was imagining it, but it was real." Julia sat down slowly. "Erin, I remember Lena's first Christmas. She gave me a bracelet she made, and I said thank you, and Aunt Carol told me not to encourage her, like she was a stray or something, and I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. I was 13, but I've never forgotten." Julia didn't speak. Her throat was too tight. Erin sniffled. "They always said she was cold, but she wasn't. She was just careful, and honestly, I always thought she was the bravest of all of us." Julia felt something crack open, a pressure she didn't know she'd been holding. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what they'll do with what you sent," Erin said, "but I believe you. I always did." They talked for a while after that. Nothing dramatic, no promises of reunions, just quiet truth exchanged between two people who'd been pushed to the margins in different ways. When the call ended, Julia sat in the dark living room, watching the reflection of the streetlights on the window. She wasn't healed, nothing was fixed. But something had shifted. Not everything had been swallowed by the silence. Not everyone had looked away. Some people had been watching and remembering all along. Spring arrived quietly in soft winds and trees trembling with green. Julia found herself moving slower these days, but not from exhaustion, from something closer to relief. The tension that had once coiled in her shoulders had begun to loosen little by little. Life wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and in the middle of it all, Lena had been waiting for news. She had applied to 5 different art programs, some in-state, some several hours away. She didn't talk much about the process. She filled out forms, submitted portfolios, sketched between classes and sleep. Julia watched her from the doorway some nights, marvelling at how grown she looked, and how much of that girl who once hid behind Julia's legs was still there in the tilt of her head, the tightness of her brow when she focused. One afternoon, Lena walked into the kitchen, clutching an envelope. Julia raised her eyebrows. "Is that—" Lena nodded, cheeks pink. "Yeah, it came." She handed it over. It was from Prescott Institute of the Arts, Lena's top choice, and the most competitive. Julia opened it slowly, heart pounding more than she cared to admit. "Congratulations. We are pleased to offer you a full scholarship." The words blurred briefly as her eyes welled. "You did it," she whispered. Lena gave a shy grin, but Julia noticed how her fingers twisted nervously. "That's incredible," Julia said. "You worked so hard for this." "Yeah," Lena said softly. "But I don't think I want to go." Julia looked up, stunned. "What? Why not?" "It's far," Lena said. 3 hours by train. I know that's not a lot for most people, but I don't think I'm ready." Julia blinked. "Lena, this is your dream school. I know, but I don't want to chase something that makes me feel like I'm leaving behind everything that keeps me grounded." Julia's throat tightened. "I thought you couldn't wait to get out of here." "I thought so too," Lena admitted. "But I've been thinking about it a lot, and I still need you. Not in a clingy way, not forever, but I'm not done learning from you yet. I choose to stay close. I choose us." The words hit Julia harder than any scholarship letter ever could. She stared at her daughter, this young woman who had weathered so much, who still walked through rooms with careful steps, who had once asked if being adopted made her less worthy. And now she was choosing to stay, not because she couldn't leave, but because she didn't want to. Julia stood and wrapped her arms around Lena, pulling her close. "Then we'll find the best place for you right here, somewhere you can grow without losing your roots." Lena nodded into her shoulder. "There's a programme at St. Clair College. It's smaller, but the faculty's amazing. They offered me a spot last week." "And you didn't tell me," Julia teased. "I wanted to wait, just in case you wanted me to go to Prescott." "I want you to go wherever makes you feel most like yourself." They stayed like that for a while, the kind of silence that only lives between two people who fought side by side. Later they sat on the porch watching dusk creep in. Daniel joined them with lemonade, passing a glass to each of them. "Any big news today?" he asked casually. Lena looked at Julia. Julia nodded. "I got into Prescott," Lena said. Daniel's eyes widened. "That's amazing." "I'm not going," she added. Daniel paused, then smiled gently. "Good, I'd miss you too much." They laughed together, a sound so easy it almost startled Julia. That night, after Lena had gone to bed, Julia sat alone for a while, staring at the envelope on the table. 3 hours away, a full scholarship, and her daughter had chosen here, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. It wasn't just a rebuilding, it was a reaffirmation. Family wasn't blood, it wasn't obligation, it was choice over and over again. And for the first time in a long while, Julia felt chosen too. The following weekend, Julia decided to finally clean out the hallway closet. It had become a catch-all over the years. Half seasonal storage, half emotional landfill. There were boxes of old holiday decorations, cords to electronics long gone, and folders of forgotten paperwork. It was the kind of chore she kept pushing down the list, always telling herself she'd get to it someday. That day had arrived. She dragged out a few bins, swept aside some dust, and pulled out a faded cardboard box tucked near the back. It wasn't labelled, but she recognised it by the way it was sealed. Layers of tape, scribbled stars drawn in the corners. One of Lena's. Curious, she carried it into the living room, set it on the coffee table, and slowly peeled back the lid. Inside were sketchbooks, at least a dozen of them. Some were old and frayed, the edges curled from years of flipping. Others looked untouched, crisp pages neatly aligned. Julia reached for the top one, her fingers brushing across the familiar textured cover. She opened it, and her breath caught. Every page, every single one, was a portrait of her. Some were full-body sketches, others just her face, her hands, the way she held a mug, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. There was one of her reading on the porch, sunlight spilling across her lap. Another of her cooking, slightly hunched, stirring something in a pot. In every drawing, Lena had captured her with a kind of reverence, like Julia was a lighthouse, and in the corner of each image, scribbled in Lena's careful handwriting, were two simple words, safe place. Julia blinked, her eyes already filling. She turned the page, another sketch, another smile, another safe place. She reached for the next book. It was the same. Different poses, different years, but always her, always safe place. She flipped through them, slowly, overwhelmed. These weren't just drawings, they were confessions, prayers, testaments. This was Lena's unspoken language, the truth she never quite voiced aloud. It wasn't just love, it was anchoring. It was the knowledge that no matter how stormy the world got, Julia had been her steady. She set the sketchbook down and pressed both hands to her mouth, trembling. All those years she had worried she wasn't enough, that Lena needed more, deserved better, that her silence, her cautious love, her overprotection might one day feel like a cage. But here was proof that it hadn't been a cage at all. It had been shelter. She thought of every moment she doubted herself, every exclusion, every cruel comment, every family photo where Lena had been invisible. And now, here was Lena's counter-argument in graphite and ink. You saw me. You held me. You were my safe place. Julia wiped her cheeks, laughter breaking through her tears. God, you brilliant, quiet girl. The front door opened then, and Lena stepped inside, carrying a bag of art supplies from her part-time job downtown. She froze when she saw the box. Julia stood slowly, still holding the sketchbook. You kept these? Lena looked down, cheeks flushed. Yeah, I didn't know where else to put them. They're all of me, Julia whispered. Lena shrugged, trying for casual. You were always around. No, Julia said. It's more than that. You were saying something with every one of these. Lena hesitated, then nodded. You made me feel safe, even when things were awful, even when I pretended they weren't. Julia crossed the room, holding the book like it was sacred. Why didn't you ever show me? Because I didn't want you to think I was clinging. I wanted to be strong, to handle things. Julia pulled her into a hug. You are strong, but you don't have to be alone with it anymore. I'm here, I've always been here. Lena exhaled into her shoulder. I know. They stood like that for a long moment, and when they finally sat down side by side on the floor, flipping through the sketchbooks together, Julia felt something shift in her chest, not just as a mother, but as a person. She wasn't just someone who had raised a child. She was the place that child had survived in, and no family photo, no Christmas dinner, no wedding invite would ever define that. Winter returned, as it always did, with its bitter winds and brittle light. But for Julia, the cold didn't bite the same way this year. She'd made peace with silence. Still, the messages came. An envelope arrived a week before Christmas. No return address. But Julia recognised the handwriting immediately. Her mother's cursive, neat and careful, as if the shape of the letters could soften what they carried. Inside was a photo of the family tree decorated, the fireplace lit, and beneath it the caption scribbled on the back, "It's not the same without you." A few days later, a group email from Sophie. "Still doing Christmas Eve dinner here if anyone wants to come by. We have extra seats. Lena's welcome too." Julia didn't reply. Then a message on her voicemail from her father. "Your mum misses you. We all do. Just come by for an hour. No drama. We'll keep it light. It's the holidays." It would have been easy to interpret all this as love. But Julia knew better now. These were not invitations. They were emotional ultimatums, guilt in the shape of nostalgia. She deleted the message. On Christmas morning, Julia made cinnamon rolls. Lena helped frost them, both in flannel pyjamas, both barefoot, both laughing when the icing got too runny. Daniel handed out mugs of cocoa and turned on the old fireplace loop on TV. They didn't check their phones. That same week, Lena's first art show opened at a small downtown gallery. It was part of a community series for young artists, a modest space but well lit with polished concrete floors and canvases lining the walls like windows into quiet minds. Julia walked in and stopped cold. There, on the centrepiece wall, was a large canvas painted in Lena's signature muted tones. It was a watercolour portrait of a woman sitting cross-legged in a sunroom, reading a book, light pouring across her lap. A dog lay at her feet. A tea mug rested nearby. Julia knew the scene instantly. It was her. But it wasn't vanity that made her breath catch. It was the title beneath the piece, Safe Place. Her eyes welled. She took a step closer and saw the signature on the bottom right, Lena Grace, daughter of Julia. Not just Lena Grace, not just a last name, but daughter of Julia, declared, written, permanent. Lena approached from behind, nudging her gently. Too much? Julia shook her head, wiping at her cheeks. It's perfect. They said I could price it, Lena added, grinning, but I'm not selling it. Julia smiled. Good, because no one else deserves it. Other pieces in the gallery showed snippets of their life. A drawing of the porch at dusk, Julia's old apron draped over a kitchen chair, Daniel reading a newspaper with his glasses tilted on his nose. It was a mosaic of quiet belonging, a tribute to home, not just a place, but a person. Guests walked by, pausing to admire the work. A few asked Lena about her technique, her inspirations. She answered with calm confidence, no longer the girl who shrank in crowds. Julia stood nearby, watching with pride so deep it almost hurt. That night, after the show, they returned home to find another envelope on the doorstep. This one was from Emily. Inside was a single photo, Emily's new baby wrapped in a holiday blanket, and a note. Thought you'd want to see your new niece. She has your eyes. Let's not let another year go by like this. Reach out when you're ready. Julia folded the paper and slid it into the drawer without a word. Some things deserved silence, others deserved peace, and Julia had chosen peace. The snow came late that year. In early January, flakes began drifting lazily from a grey sky, blanketing the neighbourhood in quiet. Julia sat at her desk, sipping coffee, watching the street disappear beneath the hush of white. She hadn't heard from her family since the Christmas letter from Emily, until now. A new envelope arrived, no return address again, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Her father's. Julia held it in her hands longer than she'd intended, the thumb brushing over the edge, her stomach coiled with something more complicated than dread. She opened it slowly, carefully, like she was unwrapping something fragile. Inside was a single page. Julia, I'm not good at this. I never have been. I know I've said things I can't take back, and I know silence has probably done more damage than anything I ever said aloud. I've been thinking a lot since Christmas, watching your mother cling to old stories. Watching everyone double down, because admitting they were wrong feels like losing control. But I keep coming back to one thing. I saw the way Lena looked at you. At the gallery. Sarah sent me a photo from the show. You weren't even in the frame. But she was looking at you from across the room, like you were gravity. And I realised I never gave you that. Not when you were little. Not when you became a mother. I didn't show you that you were the centre. You were always the strong one, the one who didn't need extra. And maybe that made it easier for the rest of us to ignore how much we took from you. I won't ask you to forgive me. I just wanted to say it. You were right to choose her. Love, Dad. Julia stared at the page. No manipulation, no guilt, just words, real, simple, overdue. Her first instinct was to sob. Her second was to crumble, but instead she breathed. She folded the letter carefully, pressed the creases smooth, and placed it into the drawer beside the others. Not with Emily's photos, not with the guilt-laced notes from her mother. Alone. Separate. She didn't tell Lena, not because she was hiding it, but because the apology wasn't a solution. It wasn't a bridge. It was a moment. A single light flickering in the rearview mirror. And she wasn't turning back. That evening, she stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in her favourite coat. Lena joined her, a blanket around her shoulders, 2 mugs of tea in hand. They sat in silence, watching the world soften under snow. After a while, Julia spoke. Not to Lena, not exactly. To herself, to anyone who needed to hear it, to everyone who ever felt like home wasn't built for them. You can't choose where you come from, but you can choose who you protect. Lena turned to her, puzzled. What was that? Julia smiled, just thinking out loud, and then she leaned into her daughter's shoulder, letting the snow fall quietly around them. 2 women who had chosen each other again and again, in a world that never made it easy. But then again, nothing worth building ever is.